Welcome to the People of AI podcast, showcasing inspiring people with interesting stories in the field of artificial intelligence. I'm Ashley Oldacre. Let's jump right in. Any remarks made by the speakers are their own and are not endorsed by Google. Hi everyone, Ashley here. I'm super excited today to be joined by Fergus Hurley and Nia Castelly today from Chex. Welcome both of you. Very happy that you're here.
Thanks so much for having us. We're honored to be here.
Thanks so much, Ashley. I'm honored to be featured on the show here. You've had some amazing guests in the past, and I've learned a lot from listening to your previous podcast. So really excited to be here today to share some of our learnings.
Excellent. I can't wait to dive into our conversation today. But before that, I'd like to, like all of our guests, read your bios. And so we'll start with that. We'll start with you, Fergus. Fergus Hurley is a product management director in Google Cloud, along with being the co-founder and general manager of Chex, which is Google's AI-powered compliance platform. Fergus has been working on 0 to 1 product development at Google over the past decade, starting as a product manager in Google Research at the headquarters in Mountain View, where he successfully graduated 2 AI products. He then moved to Google London, where he started a group focused on Android app excellence, which created AI-powered products used by hundreds of thousands of developers, including Android Vitals, Google Play pre-launch report, and reviews analysis. Fergus was a founder in residence at Google's in-house incubator before starting Chex. Chex graduated from Google Labs last year to become part of Google's developer product groups. Yay! Prior to joining Google, Fergus was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, where he founded and sold one of the first venture-backed photo app companies. Fergus grew up in Ireland, where he completed his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering at University College Cork, and then moved to the US to complete his master's degree at MIT in EECS. Fergus has over 10 issued patents, and in his spare time, he advises and invests in startups. Welcome, Fergus. All right, Nia. Nia Castelly is co-founder and head of legal for Chex, Google's AI-powered compliance platform. Prior to co-founding Chex, Nia was senior product counsel for the Google Play Store, where she focused on mobile app distribution issues, platform policy and enforcement, product privacy, and data protection policy. Before joining Google, Nia was a senior litigator in New York and DC, where she represented clients in complex IP and commercial litigation. Wow. Nia earned her JD from Columbia Law School and her BS in computer science from Spelman College. A lifelong entrepreneur, Nia is an avid supporter of early-stage startups through How Women Invest LP and is a founding member of the Black Angel Group. She is also a frequent speaker at global events such as the Viva Tech, IAPP Global Privacy Summit, Techonomy, and World AI Cannes Festival, where she shares her insights on the latest privacy trends, innovations, and best practices. Welcome to you both. It's an honor to have you on the show and to hear about both of your stories. So let's jump right in.
Yeah, I could start. Started with my parents, where they forced me to apply to the local magnet school. It's called Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Tech. At the time, one of the best high schools in the country, we like to say. I gained admission, and much to my chagrin, because all of my friends were going somewhere else.
Such a hard time.
Right. But I got to TJ, and that's where I learned about computer science and just all of these things and fell in love with it. And I loved coding. I loved all, that was involved in that. But I'd always wanted to be a lawyer. And so fast forward, I ended up going to school, and I knew that even if you wanted to be a lawyer, it didn't matter what you majored in. So I majored in computer science, what I enjoyed doing. At the time, back then, what was really the focal area was web development. So that's what I focused on. I ended up graduating and worked for the federal government and as an information systems analyst for a while, and then went to law school. But even in law school, tech was still pulling me. I was part of the Law and Science and Technology Journal, which at that time was a big thing, right? There wasn't this much. Like now people probably hear it and I'm like, of course lawyers are talking about this. But back then it was a bit of an anomaly. But that was the exciting part of it, because you could see where things were going. And even when I went out to practice, as you mentioned, I was a litigator. And one of the things that came up during that point was really like in terms of discovery, how do you deal with, before it was just paper, right? So companies have their files, their paper files, and when you're in a lawsuit or a dispute, you produce that documentation. But then, electronic documents were exploding. And it's like, what do you do with that?
Right.
And so that became a big focal point of litigation, and what exactly constitutes, have you searched everything? Have you produced everything? In what file format? And they called that e-discovery. And so that
e-discovery?
E-discovery, so electronic discovery. Again, we are so far past this at that point, but this was a big issue then.
Of course.
So there was even litigation and motions around that. And that became a specialty of mine because I understood the technology that was just being rolled out then. So there were vendors offering, their services, and it's like, lawyers are the last ones that tend to be open to technological advancements.
Oh, really?
So, yeah,
I
we're a little slow.
That. Oh, interesting. Okay.
So there was, some question about, okay, what is this machine learning to be able to identify? We need people doing this. And so there was a lot of back and forth. So that's how I ended up coming to Google. And so not surprisingly, Google is at the forefront of the e-discovery, proponents, right? Like explaining to courts, education, being thought leaders in that space. And that's really how my journey has been. And we'll talk a bit more about what I've done since then. But that's kind of my story and how I got into this area.
That's fascinating. And one of the things I love about talking to guests on this podcast is the intersection of interests, which are seemingly not obvious. And so I want to take us back to, this interest in technology. You said you fell in love with it. Can you describe more about, like, was there like a book or video games, or like what sort of drew you into that?
Well, it's hard to say. I think I'm very inquisitive. So I like to read and I like to look and learn about new things. I think in terms of how I even got into computer science, that's just the way my brain worked, and it was logical and it made sense. And so that was the pull for me and why I enjoyed coding. But I also think it actually is very similar to how we construct arguments, right, on the legal side.
Oh, say more.
So same concept of, okay, you need to start, there's variables, which may be, or constants, which may be your evidence, or your variables may be your argument or how you interpret a law. But you have to lay it out and ultimately convince, the reader, the judge, whoever it is, that they should adopt your position. So that sort of logical sequence is the same at a high level, in terms of how you have to lay out code, because you're moving from one thing to the next to get to an ultimate destination. At least that's how it works in my brain.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, in terms of, I think I kind of fell into it. Like, I think litigation, I was well positioned because I wasn't scared of the technical aspect of it, where others, lawyers who might not have been in this space, were. So I was like, yeah, it makes sense to me. I can work on this. And then, I continued to do that in Google. And then, even we'll talk about our story coming up. But so sort of that was falling into it. I understood machine learning because we had talked about it, or I dealt with it in terms of litigation. So when we started our checks journey, that was a big part of it. So it made sense to me then. So for me, it just was like more of happenstance. I was around it. I liked it. And that's why I continued to work in this area.
I have some friends in this field who are constantly having to deal with different subject matters. I mean, sort of the process through which to defend a case is somewhat similar, but the content of what and the topic of what you're defending varies. And so you have to do so much research and so much learning and understanding. And I'm assuming that you applied that mindset when you were learning about machine learning too. Were you struggling to learn about machine learning, or was it something that you had to learn about all at once?
Well, I will say I'm still learning, and it is a process, but I think you hit the nail on the head. I think as a lawyer, and even more so as a litigator, you do have to learn these different, businesses and subject matters to be able to speak, coherently and advance your client's interests. So I think that expertise has served me well at being able to be nimble and pull this in, and then not having, innate fear of non-STEM people of like, like, I'm not scared of this. It's just something to learn. And there's some sort of bedrock principles and understanding that I have. But it is, you learn as you go. It is very much, there's all sorts of information, and it changes as this area is expanding rapidly. But I've been extremely fortunate to be surrounded by amazing Googlers who are, super experts at this, and just being able to learn under them. I think we'll talk about this in a little bit, but Hamza was one of our early partners when we were building checks, and he's like one of, the eminent voices in this field, and I learned so much from him. So even as we were building, checks and thinking about how we could solve this problem using various technologies, it is a constant learning experience. And even today, I think what's most exciting from a legal perspective is there's so many novel ideas and questions and, viewpoints about how do we address this technology that's amazing and has the ability, to be so impactful in our world in a positive way. But how do we, ensure that protections are in place, right? That make sense, that don't stifle innovation, but make sure we have the right frameworks in place to do so responsibly.
I really want to get more into this topic. But before we do, I would love to turn to Fergus's story. Fergus, I don't have a feeling that learning about AI and machine learning has been as challenging for me, and less so maybe for Nia. But I think you've sort of been in this sort of forever. Is that right?
Not forever, but for a while. In terms of AI terms, probably forever. But yeah, just I'm actually an electrical engineer by training, and have moved much more into the AI space over the past decade. But I can sort of walk you through that journey.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I was born in the west coast of Ireland. I grew up in Galway, beautiful place. I recommend everyone to visit it. Bring your raincoat. And so after finishing high school there, I went to Cork, which is in the south part of Ireland, to study electrical engineering. In Ireland, you pick when you're 16 what you're going to do for college, and they offer medical degrees straight from high school into undergrad. And so at 16, it's hard to know, what path to go on. And I'd never met someone who, was a tech entrepreneur or built tech companies before. But my dad was a professor of electrical engineering at the local university, University College Galway. And that's where I had inspiration from seeing sort of his path of, being a professor. Working on hard problems and being able to teach people. And so sort of was on that sort of academic path initially. One of the only courses I could pick to not have to go to the local university was the course my dad was teaching. Because in Ireland you had to get points to do these courses, and I had enough points to do every course in that university, but he would pay for me to not be a student of his in his own university. And so I ended up going down to Cork, which is where he went to undergrad himself actually. And was studying there, and you asked me about the light bulb moment of sort of how you got involved in tech. One of the courses we did take that was not like a technical course for electrical engineering was a course on commercialization. And one of the books we had to read as part of that course was a book called The New Thing, and it's a book about a famous entrepreneur, Jim Clark, who started Netscape along with Mark Andreessen and a bunch of other companies. And that book was sort of my first insight into this whole world of Silicon Valley, and hadn't really heard much about that before. And at that time, you couldn't watch videos on YouTube or listen to podcasts to learn about it. And it's so amazing today that you are able to watch these videos on these top entrepreneurs and listen to podcasts with the thought leaders and hear their current thinking. It's just phenomenal. It's something I love doing myself. But yeah, back then, that book was sort of my inspiration to be like, wow, this Silicon Valley place sounds amazing. You can solve hard problems that are at the scale of solving problems for society, and hopefully make the world a better place. And so I, after getting my undergrad, went to MIT, and that was sort of my path to getting to America. And while at MIT, I was lucky enough to take some courses there that entrepreneurs would come in and these are very technical entrepreneurs that would come to MIT to speak about their path, and they would talk about how they did it successfully. And so that's sort of where then you start getting inspired and see like, okay, if they could do it, maybe I could do it too. And so then I signed up after I got my master's in electrical engineering and computer science at MIT to go to do a course at Stanford, where at the time the person who was president of Stanford, John Hennessy, who's the chairman of Alphabet, he started a course called the Stanford Summer Institute of Entrepreneurship at the business school for graduate students that want to learn how to start and run companies.
Wow.
And that was a pretty amazing course over the summer and that I did. And President at the time, John Hennessy, came in and would tell the students about how he started this course because he wished the Google founders had more business training before they started Google, and how much better they could have done if they had some business training, which is a joke, but in some ways, everyone needs a lot of insights here.
Right.
And how to build a business.
Right.
I was lucky enough to do that course, and then out of that, I started one of the first venture-backed photo app companies, and this was back in 2008. Sold that company, and then reflected on okay, what did I learn through this time? What would I do differently next time around? And where do I think the biggest opportunities are going to be moving forward? And one of the things I felt is just that AI is going to be a really important technology to deeply understand and to work with the top people in that space. And if you want to build those products, you got to start building them kind of now in 2013, even before the technology is ready, and be the best product person you can be in that space. And so an opportunity opened up to join Google Research and build AI products there. And so in 2013, joined Prabhakar Raghavan, who had a very small group at the time, now has a very large group at Google, running all of knowledge and information at Google Search. He had a group focused on trying to incubate products that were going to be important for core Google businesses, but were not on their immediate roadmap. And so we built multiple products there. I successfully graduated 2 products after just over a year there. And then realized, awesome. the technology that we were working with at the time, it just wasn't, ready for the prime time that we are in right now, where it's actually come so far as a result of the advances in transformer model and generative AI. And so after spending a year and a bit in Google Research, moved to London, where I started working on applying AI to problems that we knew existed and could be, AI could be part of the solution, but it wasn't the whole solution. And so we were working on improving the Android developer experience, and as a result, the Android consumers experience. And one of the enterprises we built there is called Android Vitals. It's used by the vast majority of top Android developers to understand their technical performance. So we give metrics like battery stability, rendering, startup time, but also metrics like privacy, metrics such as permission denial rates. And through that, was working with a lot of developers and was exposed to more and more of their problems. And compliance just came up as constantly a problem that they had, right. Especially with GDPR emerging. And so we also built another product called the Google Play pre-launch board, which is where we have a smart AI crawler interact with the app, similar to the way a human would interact with an app. And it's able to log into the application, it's able to complete transactions, all these different things to be able to test the surface area of the application and track its performance before it's launched to consumers. And then also worked on reviews analysis, where we're applying AI to, in the form of NLP, to extract what were the people talking about in these reviews. And Google Play is one of the largest review corpuses out there. A large part of those reviews or portion
I'm
of them.
starting to see the building blocks of checks now.
Exactly. And so, a lot of these technologies we were working with, we were able to combine as part of then being able to see, okay, we're working just on the Android side of things here, but this problem of compliance applies to all digital products. And how can we, help simplify compliance and reduce risk for all digital product creators? And as a result, for consumers, help them be able to enjoy and trust digital products more.
Great story. And I love how you're setting us up for the story that's to come about how you and Nia met and how you started Check. So I think this is a good transition into that story.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, as Fergus mentioned, he was working on Google Play, and I was the product counsel on Google Play, specifically supporting the developer side, which is the Google Play console. And so that's where we met. I was his lawyer and helping him launch products and giving him, legal advice and helping smooth the way to proper launches. And so,
how is that sort of interaction? Was it kind of, because I sometimes I feel like there can be this tension between product folks and legal who. Like legal is like, no, product folks are like, yeah, let's get this out the door and let's launch this. And legal is like, nah, stop, hold on a second. So was there sort of a dynamic that way that started? Or was it really just like, hey, I need your help and I'm here to help kind of a dynamic?
I'll let Fergus tell it.
I jump in here for a second because, I think what you described actually is the case with most people's interaction with the lawyers. And I would say that, one of the things I was very grateful for when I started interacting with Nia first is that she was trying to come up with a solution together that could, work given the constraints, but still deliver as much value as possible to our customers. And so, that's what differentiated Nia from a lot of the other lawyers, and something that, is one of the greatest things about working with Nia. Is the ability to be able to find solutions to the problems rather than just saying no.
And I mean, my interaction with lawyers when we've been working on Gemini and Gemma, on our site has been very, very much similar. But I think there is a stereotype which I kind of wanted to touch on and maybe even disparage a little bit because I think it's so important to have such a good working team between the lawyers and the product folks in putting a product out there. And when you have that collaboration, it's ultimately what makes a product super successful.
Yeah. 100%. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Google has some of the best group of lawyers there are on the planet. I think just the pure breadth of what Google is doing and for lawyers to have to keep up and understand it and be able to help ensure that we can continue to go fast, but go fast safely, and understanding how to balance the risk. I mean, and it's an incredible skill set. So I know I feel very privileged to be among the number. But, as Fergus said, this is where I was excited about. Like, my passion is innovation and entrepreneurship and learning new things. And so when we first started working together, I didn't really know much about mobile apps. So it was my first foray into that area. So I learned so much, about app development and deployment and how, we perform as a platform and the services that we offer developers, but more so the challenges that developers have. So when Fergus was working on things like Android Vitals and saying, look, we can make things easier for developers. We can help them. We're in the right position to do that and to provide the tools for that. I was excited by that, right? Like, that's good for everyone.
And Vitals, when you talk about Vitals, that's like you can see an app's that's the app's vitals, basically.
Right. Yes. How it's performing. So I think Fergus mentioned, first it was about crashes, like why is your app crashing or why are you having issues in your app? And so providing transparency in that. And when they started providing that, apps, their performance increased exponentially and significantly. And so saw the value in that. And even understanding, I think it was one of my favorite features is benchmarking, right? Like, you don't know how good or bad you are as an app developer, but being able to have this insight can change. And it's like, oh, wait, why am I using that permission when no one in my category uses it? I don't need to request that. And so app permissions are a big deal from in terms of like a data privacy issues. So you don't want to request more permissions in your app than you need. So things like that. So we were very much aligned, obviously, and I want things to be safer and better. And he was using innovation and tech and all of those know-how to make things better. So that's where we started our journey. Did you want to say something first?
Yeah, this was as part of Android Bio, the first time that we were productizing the data from hundreds of millions of Android users who had opted in sharing their data with third parties to help improve their app performance, but that data hadn't been shared yet. And so, the users were trusting us with that data, and we needed to make sure that we exposed it in a way that was useful to the developers. So we'd create these metrics for the first time that didn't exist. Like, what is a battery metric for a mobile app? Or what is a startup time actual metric that you should use? So we had to invent those metrics, but in a privacy compliant way. And because we invented these metrics for the first time, people didn't have a relative comparison. When they would look at this number of like, okay, I have a 2% crash rate. It used to be 4%. Okay, that's better. 2% is better than 4% in terms of less crashes. But, relatively so compared to other video streaming apps, is that good or bad? So Netflix, when they started seeing the benchmark comparison data, they worked together as a team to drop their crash rate by 80%. So we saw, major improvements in these apps as a result of enabling them to see not just, relatively so to their previous month or previous year, what their crash rate or other metrics were, but, what is it compared to the other apps offering similar functionality. And then we also started including some of these metrics as part of the ranking in the Play Store to really incentivize the developers to take this seriously. And developers started telling us that they were spending more time in actually having higher performing apps on Android than other platforms because the incentives and visibility was there that they weren't able to get on other places.
Wow. Okay, so why not stop there? Why keep going?
Well, I think that's what created the idea. It's like, what else could we do, right? And so I think the idea of, and why I, from my perspective as a lawyer, was excited about, because all of these insights, this incremental information that is provided in a very privacy-preserving way, has a broader effect on improving the platform, the ecosystem, right? Making it safer, because that's what I'm responsible for, to make, how are we perceived in the industry? How do regulators think about us, key opinion formers, et cetera, but particularly in the privacy space. So I think a lot of this came to a head when GDPR came into effect. So if you would recall, that was a seismic shift in the industry, across companies, et cetera.
Maybe just give a quick summary about what GDPR is, just for folks who might not know.
Yes. So it's the European Union's privacy law, is like the oversimplification of it. But it was the most comprehensive one that we had really seen. And it was specific, and it coincided with, just the explosion of mobile apps, right? And so you were seeing, companies and users using sharing data and doing things across borders, right? Where you traditionally, before this, it was about, are you compliant? Are you following the rules where your company is based, right? That's all you have to consider.
Right.
But with, just the explosion of technology, now you have to consider anywhere, for example, in the mobile app space, your app is available. So you could be a small developer, or a relatively small developer, who has an amazing app that is used by people all over the world, but now you're responsible for being compliant
with like local laws.
Yeah, including in the European Union, which is why GDPR had such,
huge repercussions.
Such huge repercussions. But what it also did was it brought privacy to the top of the discussion points for everyone. So people were really, where before it may have just been the lawyers.
You're like, finally.
Like, light bulb. We can start talking about this.
Okay.
So I think, for me, during the same time, as we're working together, I'm also working on the teams, working to ensure, Google is compliant, is making necessary changes to be compliant with GDPR. But we were also hearing from developers, like, wow, this is hard.
Yeah.
Can you help us? And this is challenging. And, at the time we couldn't, right? We were all doing, still trying to figure it out. There were still interpretations to happen, et cetera, and understanding how this was going to play out.
Yeah.
But the idea of, okay, how could we do this? And so that's, where Fergus...
How could we do this?
How could we help?
Yeah.
How could we help developers?
To not just look at sort of the benchmarks within the space, but sort of be compliant now with all of these changing pieces.
That's right. And so I'll pass it to Fergus to talk about, but part of where Android Vitals, they also started to implement like some privacy related insights. And so they saw a huge uptick in that, and I'll let him talk about that, and that's how we started on this journey.
Okay.
Yeah, awesome. With Android Vitals, I was also meeting with a bunch of developers and making sure, we're building the features in a way that it is working well for them. And through those conversations, I'd also, be investing in other ideas. And so, I worked with a designer to come up with some mocks of what a compliance product could look like to help them with these emerging privacy rules. And
so this was like a side job. You're like doing this on the side to maintaining Android Vitals and the existing product that you're working on.
Yeah, exactly. And so I recently just gotten promoted at the time based on sort of the Android Vitals work, and then had also had a US green card, but was living in London. And
which is a big
you
deal.
have to come back to the US at some point if you want to hold on to the US green card. And so I told the team I was working with there, like, okay, I'm going to go back to the US and apply to Area 120 with this idea. And so people were aware that I was working on this idea, and I would meet with these developers. So, for example, I went to Helsinki and I met with Supercell, and one of the engineers at Supercell was a previous Googler. And I asked him, hey, can I talk to the person who's responsible for compliance here? And Supercell is one of the biggest, most successful game companies out there on mobile, but a very small team for how successful they are. It's only about 100 people. And so I met with the head of legal, but the legal team at Supercell is about 3 people, so a pretty small team. And that person needs help, of course, because it's such a small team. And so I presented to him, hey, we have this solution we could potentially build for you. And he looked at it and reviewed the mocks. And he was like, wow, this is amazing. If this is available today, I wouldn't hesitate. I would just buy it.
Wow.
And so that was a great validation. I'm a huge believer in validating the needs of the customers before you actually even build the product. And so, then turned around a few months later, got funding from Area 120, and that person became a paying customer of checks later on. So we'll come back to that part, but
oh wow,
it worked.
So you applied to Run 20 and you were like, wait, I have this idea. Nia, I have this idea. Come with me. Or were you both like, hey, let's just go be entrepreneurs, and oh, hey, we met up in Area 120.
I'll tell this story because I like this part. So, as I mentioned, Fergus and I, we were colleagues and, working on play. So as he was thinking about these ideas, he would bounce them off me to say, can we do this? Right. Because when you think about like, how do you provide compliance solutions, it's like, what is this, a lawyer in a box? And that's risk prone, but how could you do it? Right. And so, and as I mentioned, I'd seen like, this is a difficult area, and it was only getting more difficult because more, GDPR had come into effect, which was complicated. It's privacy regulations, right? It tells, companies, how they should handle European Union users, which is pretty wide, or if you're a company based in the European Union, the requirements around how you handle personal data and how it can be processed, et cetera. And soon after that, there were even more regulations popping up. So I was like, there has to be a better way, right? We should be able to do all the things. And, so I was really excited, what Fergus was developing. So we did a lot of back and forth. And I was one of his advisors when he was pitching to Area 120. And then he came to Mountain View, and he actually pitched in the office I was based in. And I was like, you've got got this, and he went in there.
That's awesome.
And I remember he walked out and he's like, they said yes. And I was like, that's awesome. And so I'm walking him to the elevator and he's like, you're going to come with me, right? And I was like, what? I'm just an advisor. What are you talking about? He's like, yes, I'm serious, as the elevator door closed. And then he proceeded to go on sabbatical for a couple of months.
Wow.
But it was exciting. But it was a big moment because I hadn't thought about that, right? Like I advise clients. That's what I do. It's what I love. But as I mentioned, entrepreneurship, innovation has been a big part of me. I've created small companies on the side in the past because I see a problem and I want to try to find a solution for it. And so it was exciting, the idea of being able to work on something at this point in my career, something completely different and new. But I think the part ultimately, I talked to a number of my mentors and advisors and said, can I do this? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, you can do this, right? I think the beauty of it, we're really fortunate to have had that in-house incubator, which allowed Googlers to come up with ideas, and support them and be able to have this opportunity to do this sort of in the safety of Google. So, obviously, ultimately, I said yes, and the rest is history. But it was definitely a critical point in my career in thinking, and probably one of the best decisions I ever made.
So the elevator door closes. You're like, all right, I guess I'm joining. So you both join Area 120, and then what happens?
Yeah. So we started in Area 20 in April 2020. Which was not the best time to be trying to build one of these early stage products. But we had to, adapt, of course, as COVID lockdowns were just starting. And we built the team completely remotely. And we're lucky enough to build an amazing team that was able to work extremely well across many different time zones. And we actually played, to our advantage in some ways because we were able to get a person called Hamza Harkas, who Nia mentioned earlier, who is one of the few people in the world who's done a PhD in the NLP of privacy policies. And
NLP stands for natural language processing.
Yes, correct. And so I started working with Hamza, and he took on a 20% project working with us on building out our NLP of privacy policies. And this is where we are able to have a fine-tuned model for being able to extract what is the privacy policy talking about. So, for example, who are they sharing data with? What data are they saying they are collecting, are not collecting? And then we can map that back to what the app is actually doing on real physical devices, or map it back to what it's required to do based on the regulation of the regions they have used it.
Okay, so matching what the app developer says the app is supposed to do versus what the app is actually doing.
Exactly. So the privacy policy kind of being the rule book by which the app is saying it should behave. And Nia will come back and explain a bit more about that in a bit. But the core sort of underlying technology of being able to understand the privacy policy and applying NLP for a fine-tuned model. We were using previous generations of the LLMs that we see today. So, PAM predates what we have as Gemini today. But we were using PAM and having a fine-tuned model. And many other teams at Google actually use our technology for understanding the privacy policies now as well in their products. So, we're advancing the AI space. And
the model was based off of data that included all of the privacy legal requirements. And you built a model basically that was trained on that was then applied to your model, that was then applied to the apps.
Yeah, so we built a specialized model for mobile apps. And specifically helping with understanding the privacy policies. And then privacy policies are written text that's not very well structured, and sometimes a bit complicated to understand. And so being able to extract what actually it is saying the app is doing is a complex problem in and of itself. And then being able to map that back to the behavior of the application is very important. But to build this technology, just even for the understanding of privacy policies, we had to build a lot of tools ourselves because people hadn't built these things before. And so, for example, we built a system for expert labeling. So we would have Nia and her team work on labeling the data from the privacy policies. So we would be able to understand, okay, these are examples of where the privacy policy is saying this. And that sort of technology for labeling data actually became a tool that is used by many teams across Google now today. So as part of us building our core product, we also sort of viewed ourselves as a team to be able to provide technology to other teams at Google that were going to face similar problems and challenges themselves. And one of the key things that helped us be able to build our product, and one of the reasons why we built the product at Google in the first place, is because we were able to tap into a lot of the technology that Google had built for its own products. Google has one of the largest corporate product portfolios out there, and it has a lot of technology that's built to help those teams do things at scale. And so we were able to take advantage of that technology, but also give back to the teams and let them use the technology that we built.
That's awesome. That's so great.
I think going back to what Fergus is saying, so if you imagine even as a user, right, you look at these privacy policies or terms of service and you're like, wow, that's really long. I don't want to read that.
Right.
How do you pull out that information? And so that's really what Hamza's expertise came in. So by connecting with him, we came up with the idea of, wow, could we use this, harness that, train, multiple classifiers about the different aspects of a privacy policy exists. So this is where the legal part comes in, right? So we know that your privacy policy is generally where companies communicate to their users what they're doing in terms of their personal data or not doing. So there are elements in there. What types of data are we collecting? What types of data are we sharing? For what purpose, et cetera.
Right.
But these are huge documents, right? And to do that at scale, if we're going to provide a service, we needed to leverage this new technology. And so, as Fergus said, part of the development of checks was doing that. We hired a group of legal experts, basically lawyers, but, who are experts in terms of understanding and being able to see, oh, that's right, that's correct. And so they could train the classifiers we built. And so that was the foundational part of the first aspect of what checks is. Mm-hmm. So we call that, at the time we called them our compliance checks, but it's part of our app compliance today of what we're talking about. So the framework that we use, and it's amazing you hit on part of it, is that we look at what an app is required to do. So this would be the regulations like a GDPR, a privacy regulation, or subsequent regulations that came up like the CCPA in California and the whole host of privacy-related requirements and other requirements around the world that have come up. But also, policies. So like your platform policy. So Google Play has requirements.
Right, of course.
That a developer must think about and other places. So we look at what you're required to do. And then we look at what you say you're doing, and that's what we were just talking about. So we use NLP, we leverage that, AI to review and analyze these privacy policies at scale to pull out what you say you're doing, and then we compare that to what you're actually doing, which was the next part of our journey, because that's what we ultimately realized. The impetus for this was we saw that it wasn't getting easier, right? Regulations continued to pop up in various areas. And how do you keep up, right? It's hard for huge companies to do it, but even mid-size and even smaller companies, how do you keep up with the changing regulations?
Anybody who wants to develop an app, wants to be an app developer.
If you're providing any sort of digital product, across geographic lines, and even within the U.S., we continue to see legislation. How do you keep up with the changing policies? Can we make it easier? Can we simplify it? So we came up with our tagline, which is simplifying privacy at the time, and now we're more expansive. So it's simplifying compliance, reducing risk. And that ultimately has been our, focus area. Like, how can we leverage technology to provide the insights companies need at the time they need it so they can make the right decisions and make adjustments. So the two things we came up with so far, that's the first two prongs of our compliance triangle, as we call it. We focused on what the requirements were, and that's where the legal team came in. And I can talk a bit more about that, how we developed it. But really, but what do you say you're doing? And sometimes that can be out of sync.
Right.
And so that's when we let them know, when what you're required to do isn't matching what either you say you're doing or what you're actually doing.
Right.
And that's what you see in our product dashboard.
And it benefits both the user and the developer because it allows the user, because trust is a huge thing right now with regards to the information that's out there. I get questions all the time from folks outside Google that are like, what app, what thing, what can I trust out there? There's just so much hype around it. And so I love that this is a system not only for the developer to hold themselves accountable and to help them figure out the right thing to do, but it's also it helps people, sort of the developers also provide the best for the users, and then the users, there's that much more trust that the user has towards the developer. Yeah. And I also just had a light bulb moment about the name. Checks. It checks out and it checks.
Yes.
Brilliant. Who came up with the name?
We put a lot of work in this and thought. And ultimately, that's
well deserved. I mean, it's a brilliant name. I love the name.
Yeah, but I think, you hit the nail on the head. Even companies that want to do right, to be compliant, do the right thing, it's just challenging. And they want to do right by their users. And you're right, there's huge downstream benefits. But we really think and believe and continue to innovate in this area that we can use the same technology that is growing and advancing to help make these things easier and these compliance tasks easier, and so that you can still continue to move fast and delight your users, but you can also do it in a safe and compliant way.
And actually, just to build on that, one of the things that we did at the start was just reflect on, what's our purpose here? And so our mission is to simplify compliance and reduce risk. But the purpose and reason why we do that is to enable people to enjoy and trust digital products. And we think one of the best ways to enable people to enjoy and trust digital products is to actually help the product creators actually focus on what they do best, which is providing their unique value prop to customers, and really simplify all the things that they need to worry about related to compliance, so that they can just do the right thing, out of the box as much as possible.
I love beautiful mission. I love that. So, in all of this, how does this actually work?
So, we have what we call the checks compliance framework, which consists of the first part, what the app is required to do. And Nia talked about the government regulations around the world, and how there's more and more regulation emerging all the time, and how can we simplify that for the digital product creators. Second is the digital product creators are telling us what their product should be doing, and that's written by their legal team or compliance team, and it often is in form of a privacy policy or a safety label on the stores. And in the future, there'll be AI policies that people will create. But those people who are writing those policies oftentimes are not people building the product themselves, but they are responsible for what the product actually does. And so the third part is looking at what the app is, or digital product is actually doing. And this is where we do dynamic and static analysis of the product to try and understand as much as possible. And so for a customer that comes to checks, all they need to do is verify that they own that application, and we run the checks on it using the public version of the app. They don't need to do any instrumentation. We take that app and we run it, iOS or Android, on real physical devices, and we monitor the network traffic coming off the app and any other things that we can detect, which is what a regulator could detect as well. So very important for the developers to understand. And most developers are good acting developers and want to do the right thing. But oftentimes they don't know all the things themselves that their product is doing, because and most apps have over 20 software development kits inside their application that help them with all this other functionality, such as ad yield optimization, analytics, crash reporting, all these different things. And most of these SDKs are, well behaved, but sometimes some of them have issues. But it's the person who's building that digital product's responsibility for what those software development kits are doing as well. And so the companies need visibility into what those software development kits are doing, and Checks provides that.
Ah, okay.
So we have a great story that I love sharing. One of our early partners, a developer who develops for kids. So obviously, privacy and being compliant is top of mind for them because they have very precious users. So they're trying to do the right thing. And so when they ran their first Checks report, one of the things they saw that there was still an SDK inside their app sending off crash reports, which they thought they had taken out because it was a perfectly innocuous type of SDK, but because of its users, it was sending screenshots to help with crash reporting, and that wasn't okay. And somehow that information didn't get to the right people, and the ball was dropped somewhere, and the SDK was still there. But because of the insights provided in the Checks report, they were able to see that and immediately take action and remove that SDK that they thought wasn't there, but still was. So that's where we see really the power of what Checks can do by providing insights to everyone who's working on the app development.
That is such a useful tool to have. And so it sounds like Checks has also grown enormously because you started in 2020. When did you first launch it, and where are you now?
Yeah, so we launched publicly, which was a big deal to get that in, was it February 22nd, 2022? So that was a watershed moment for us. But I guess the biggest moment was just this past May at I.O.
At I.O.
It's very exciting for us because
I know, I saw you guys on stage. I was like, oh my God, this is so exciting.
I think it was something Fergus and I had been dreaming of since we started. So it was definitely a dream come true to see, Checks announced our app compliance offering was available for general availability for any developer to sign up and bring the power of Checks to their, app development. But there were other things. We didn't rest on our laurels. What we found is, this compliance framework we talked about, what your product is required to do, what it says, what you say it's doing, and what it's actually doing works well through a lot of different places. So in addition to app compliance and saying that was available, we've continued to leverage, technology as it's expanded, and we announced the private preview of what we call co-compliance. And so Fergus will talk a little bit more about that.
So on the co-compliance side of things, we're using Gemini-powered compliance agents to help professional developers get real-time comprehensive compliance coverage of their entire development workflow. So developers can be able to use it to be able to continuously ensure their code changes, do not introduce new risks, understand how personal data is collected, and provide recommendations for triaging those issues. And so it's using AI for people who are using AI themselves as part of their development workflow to be much more productive. But that's how we sort of frame things as AI tooling. But then there's the AI-powered applications. And for the AI-powered applications that are introducing Gen AI, they need to make sure that those Gen AI products are behaving correctly. And that's where we have our AI safety offering to help with that. And so we break that problem space out into sort of three parts today. All related to sort of the content safety of these Gen AI products. And so the first part is align, second is evaluate, and third is monitor. So align is about the companies being able to set the policies. How do they want their actual Gen AI product to behave? And so do they want it to just stick on topic to the thing that is related to their product offering? And what topics do they want to avoid? And so, for example, one of the policies we have out of the box is around personally identifiable information. And so, if you're building a support agent for a developer product, then you probably don't need PII. But if you're building a
personally identified information,
but if you're building a support agent for, let's say, an airline, then it's pretty important to get the information from the person so you can solve their problem.
Right.
And so, people can be able to set their policies in the first part of a line. And then the second part is evaluate. So once you've set these policies, then you need to make sure that your model is actually behaving correctly before you launch it to the public. And this is where we've built up a huge collection of adversarial prompts that people can be able to run against their model beforehand. And these prompts are based on the different policies that you set. And so then you can see the results of that and be able to see, okay, actually, we're not meeting our standard for this policy with our current iteration of our model. And so we'll go through and fine tune the model to make sure that it actually behaves correctly. And then the last part is the monitoring part, and the most important part, where people launch these Gemini products to the public. They can use many different models. Through Vertex, there's 150 plus models available, and so people are often swapping out the different models that they're using too. And so it's very important, though, no matter what model you're using, that the model does not do certain things that are going to potentially impact your brand,
right,
or expose information that you wouldn't want exposed. And so we have a guardrails product to help with this part of putting the safeguards in place and monitoring your GenAI input prompts that people are putting into the model, so preventing users from trying to jailbreak your model on the input prompt, and then the output prompt, making sure it's not outputting PII or code or things that aren't related to what your agent or model should be doing.
Wow. Fascinating. Couldn't be more important right now. I'm so impressed by the speed and the thoughtfulness at which you're doing this and making this accessible to the general public. So this is just such an honor to have you both and tell the story.
Oh, thanks so much.
So you've both, AI is a big part of your lives now, and this podcast is about the people of AI. And we started off this season with the question of what does it mean to be a person of AI, and you've both been now in this space for a while, and I would love to hear your thoughts about. Both of you are solving problems using AI, but is that really what defines and what makes a person of AI?
Yeah, I think that's the exciting part, I think, now. And I'm glad, you're focused on this because, for even people like me, right? Like I'm a lawyer. In the past, I think we've thought about people of AI, are the true experts, right? Who understand this to the minute detail and understand, how all of it works. But the exciting part is that it's expanding so rapidly, and that, from my viewpoint, anyone who obviously is using it or is passionate about it or implementing it into their various their life or their work is now a person of AI. And I think all of us have a responsibility into how it's developed, it's used, and as we've mentioned, making sure we're doing so responsibly. So I'm really excited about what the future holds and how the people of AI the group is expanding rapidly.
I agree. Fergus, what about you?
Yeah, it's similar to Nia. I think that in the past, people of AI were people who chose to dedicate their career to working in AI and become researchers or product managers or developers, lawyers in the space, etc. Whereas now, it's any industry you're in, you can be able to use AI in new ways. There was a book I recently read from Ray Kurzweil, another Googler who's an AI visionary, called The Singularity is Nearer. I would recommend folks to read that book. But he talks about how AI is just transforming so many industries, and so I just encourage everyone to just try and figure out how can AI be used in their industry, and so how can we have everyone be people of AI. I was recently at this event in New York where one of the first employees I had at my first startup was speaking, and she told the story of how she got this job, and it was her first job out of Stanford at the startup I had, and when she started, she didn't know what her job title really was, and it was so early in mobile, there were no titles of like mobile product manager, and how in the AI space, just like back then in mobile, we don't know what all the jobs are going to be in the AI space yet, and the new jobs are going to be created in new industries and existing industries as a result of the AI enablement. So I think just, people making sure that they stay on top of the trends. It's changing so fast, and just listen to podcasts like this, and watch videos, and just maximize your learning as much as possible, so that you can be able to be a successful person of AI.
And how lucky are we, and what an honor to have both of you helping the people that are becoming people of AI to do this with compliance responsibly and safely. So thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to come on and share your stories and talk about checks. And we will link all of the links and resources that you talked about in the show notes. So listeners, feel free to check out the show notes as well. And thank you both. Such a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much, Ed.
If you would like to learn more about our conversation or our guests, check out the links below. Please subscribe, and if you're feeling extra generous, give us a 5-star rating. We would love to hear from you, so leave us a comment. We'll read every one. Until next time, thank you for listening.